Okay, we are finally ready to start. Senator Just has texted me and said he has a problem with a furnace this morning, so he'll join us by Zoom whenever he can. And Senator Harris is trying to get on Zoom. So we'll get started here this morning. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, committee, for being here. We're going to start right off with Director Miller, and he's going to talk to us about GNA. And I think some of his folks are joining us by Zoom as well.
Oh, sorry, there it is.
Okay. You can do it? I got it. Thanks, Scott. Okay. Madam Chair, thank you. Good morning, committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I think everybody can hear me okay. It's good to see everybody again, and we're getting some rain out there, so definitely that time of year and welcoming. So I'm Dustin Miller. I'm the director of the Idaho Department of Lands. We're the state land management and state forestry and fire agency. I really want to thank Madam Chair. You and Senator Burtenshaw were with us a few weeks ago up in North Idaho. We toured around the GNA project up there in North Idaho. It was the Albini GNA project that's near Priest River. And I think it serves as an example of how programs like this, partnership with the federal government, the Forest Service, can help us mitigate fire risk. Sure enough, the Mercy Fire burned through that GNA project, and it stopped it quickly because of that active management on Forest Service ground. So that's why this Good Neighbor Authority program is important. So I'm calling this Good Neighbor Authority 101. We'll try not to get too weedy. I better set my timer here so I don't go too far over. But I do want to introduce Craig Foss. Craig Foss is joining us via Zoom, and Craig is our state forester. He's up in Coeur d'Alene. He also heads our forestry and fire division. So Craig will help with the Q&A here in just a little bit. So just want to set the stage here a little bit. Given the challenges we have here in Idaho with the vastness of our forest lands, and predominantly that being National Forest System lands. Idaho, along with other western states, face a wildfire crisis on federally managed lands, and within the continuously expanding wild and urban interface. And the wild and urban interface is in particular a challenge for us because those are areas where we do have fire responsibility to suppress fires, and so there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk associated with fighting fire in the wild and urban interface, and certainly that's expanding here in Idaho. And fire knows no boundaries and puts endowment land, private industrial timberland, and those who live in the wild and urban interface at risk. And I know this is something that this committee is acutely aware of. The risks and costs of wildfires are staggering. Last season, Idaho spent approximately $17 million suppressing wildfires. And this is just our portion. This is just the state's portion of the bill. In a bad year, the state's cost can exceed $75 million, and we saw that in the 2021 fire season. As far as wildfire seasons go, this one was a relatively mild summer. Still, we had the Sarah Loop fire, which again, Representative Boyle participated in the tour in North Idaho, where we showed folks the Sarah Loop fire. This is up near Athol, and that could have been that could have turned out differently had the abundant air support not been there and available for us. The Parkway fire in Post Falls, that also threatened the wild and urban interface, as well as the hospital fire in Orofino, which unfortunately burned several homes. So the purpose of the Good Neighbor Authority. The Good Neighbor Authority allows the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to enter into agreements for up to 10 years with state forestry agencies to implement critically important management work on federally controlled land when the federal agencies are unable to do the work alone. With the decrease of timber harvest on federal lands in the 1980s, the Forest Service lost much of its most powerful land management tool, which are timber harvests. By the 2000s, it became obvious that federal lands, because of environmental gridlock and litigation, were not being managed. Earlier this century, groups like the National Association of State Foresters, which Idaho is a member, represented through Craig, championed finding collaborative solutions to forest health on federal lands. And so the idea of the Good Neighbor Authority was born. GNA is rooted in the idea that states have the knowledge and expertise to manage land within their boundaries, and that federal land managers, given the vastness of their acreage and multiple challenges, desperately need our help. After GNA was announced by Congress under the 2014 Farm Bill, Idaho hit the ground running. Over time, Congress has refined and amended the Good Neighbor Authority. In 2015, the Idaho Legislature provided clear direction to the Idaho Department of Lands, and that was to carry out forest, rangeland, and watershed restoration services on appropriate federal lands within Idaho. Based on the direction provided by Senate Joint Resolution 126, Idaho convened a GNA Working Group to prioritize how Idaho would implement the Good Neighbor Authority and define the state's goals. And 3 important goals were developed. Idaho wanted to work quickly at the landscape level to address risks on federal land. And since we're a fiscally responsible agency here in Idaho, our GNA program had to be self-sustaining. And the timber growing in Idaho is incredibly valuable, as we all know. Under GNA, timber growing on federal land should cover the costs associated with managing federal land. And GNA must increase the volume of fiber that's brought to market in Idaho. And this is critically important. Here's something that's interesting, an interesting fact here. For every 1 million board feet harvested in Idaho, 9 jobs are directly supported. GNA started with Idaho's statewide GNA Master Agreement that was signed in 2016, and with seed money provided by the Idaho Legislature, the Forest Service, and industry. On the heels of that GNA Master Agreement, Idaho entered into supplemental agreements with 4 of Idaho's 7 national forests. Under the agreement, IDL staff worked closely with the Forest Service to designate 6.4 million acres of national forest land for treatment of insect and disease outbreaks. Under GNA, IDL and the Forest Service collaborate to plan and implement projects in the designated areas to address forest health, reduce hazardous fuels, improve habitat for wildlife and fisheries, and repair Forest Service system roads. Idaho then implements projects using our employees in the GNA Bureau. IDL contracts for restoration services with privately owned Idaho companies, again using our contracting procedures. IDL administers the federal timber sales contracts and retains the proceeds of sales to fund future GNA projects. And you can see here on the diagram how it all kind of works here conceptually. The seed money came to the state through the agreement between us and the U.S. Forest Service. We plan to then implement commercial restoration projects, which are timber sales. Those receipts are generated. A portion of those costs go to offsetting our costs at IDL for our GNA Bureau. And then we also send receipts and other funding associated with those timber sales to the Forest Service. The remaining funds then go into the non-commercial restoration projects on Forest Service lands. And then we kind of start the program again. The remaining funds then go into planning and implementing additional timber sale projects. Receipts are generated, and the cycle continues. Idaho's GNA agreement sets the parameters under which our program treats federal land. I think there is one important facet of GNA that this committee needs to know. The Good Neighbor Authority, unfortunately, does not exempt projects from the National Environmental Policy Act or NEPA compliance. To be blunt, the abuse of NEPA is perhaps the single largest Kelly hump in the road to Forest Service health. For those of you who haven't spent much time traversing logging roads, which I'm sure most of you have, Kelly hump is a large ditch or mound placed across a road to close it to vehicular access. So it's a good analogy there when talking about NEPA. While there are categorical exclusions under GNA that permit the U.S. Forest Service to abbreviate the NEPA process for projects under 3,000 acres for linear fuel breaks, the Forest Service has been very reluctant to use these exemptions. Another GNA issue this committee should follow closely is work to correct an omission in the 2018 Farm Bill that prohibits counties and tribes from retaining the proceeds of federal timber sales they administer under their own Good Neighbor Authority agreements with the federal government. Currently, Adams County and Valley County both have GNA agreements with the Forest Service, but federal law currently won't allow them to retain and reinvest the timber harvest receipts. So work is currently underway to fix that problem. When we started GNA, stakeholders initially thought it would mostly revolve around timber sales, but folks realized that there was other work that needs to be done to restore national forest lands and focus on outcomes that a broad range of the public would support. We've learned restoration services include a broad range of activities, such as those listed here on the screen. Specific to planning and monitoring, nearly 20% of the $16 million generated from GNA timber sales since 2016 has been spent on NEPA-related work. And in a few minutes, I'll provide you with an accounting of what types of projects GNA proceeds have funded. And so here's some other restoration services: veg treatments, rodent repair, restoration, and prescribed burning. So first I'll recap the investment the Idaho Legislature has made with our Good Neighbor Authority program. While describing how GNA works, I mentioned that Idaho, our forest products industry, and the U.S. Forest Service all provided seed money to initiate the program. The rationale at the time was that those who would benefit from GNA should help fund the launch of the program. Overall, since FY 2017, Idaho's GNA program has cost a total of $31.5 million. Recalling that one of the three goals Idaho established was to build a self-sustaining program, it's worth noting that more than 50% of the program's total funding has come from the sale of federal timber. For the first 5 years of the program, the legislature appropriated $250,000 from the general fund to cover the cost of the program. In fiscal year 22, the program reached the goal of becoming self-supporting, so we reverted that year's appropriation back to the legislature. Based on the recommendation from another forest health initiative, shared stewardship, in FY22, the legislature began appropriating $250,000 annually of general fund to fund operating to help fast-track GNA projects, so moving from the personnel cost to operating. Here's one example: the Four Corners fire last year that burned more than 14,000 acres on the Boise and Payette National Forest. We worked with those two forests to bring nearly 4.4 million board feet of salvage volume to market. Given how quickly fire-kill timber loses its value, we used some of the operating money to contract with a private company to rebuild the haul road for the sale, which meant the timber could be sold and harvested before it rotted and lost its value. So we moved very quickly on that one. IDL's GNA program is currently staffed with 15 permanent and 12 seasonal employees. When you examine our agency's FTP count, much of our staffing growth in recent years is attributed to the launch and expansion of the Good Neighbor Authority program. Our FY25 budget request includes 3 additional FTP. Since entering into agreements with 4 of Idaho's 7 national forests in 2016, we've entered into agreements with BLM and 2 more national forests. If this request is approved, it would provide the capacity we need to undertake more GNA projects and bring more federal timber to market. We're also asking for $154,000 in PC spending authority and $2 million in operating. Both of these requests are for dedicated funds, so no general fund cash appropriation is needed, so just dedicated funds. The monies to cover this spending authority will come from the selling of federal timber and retaining the proceeds. The $2 million in operating spending authority will help us resolve a bottleneck with project contracting. This money will be spent to hire private contractors to provide the restoration services. Each year we conduct more and more GNA projects on federal land. Our FY23 plan included grading, brushing, or resurfacing more than 100 miles of roads, replacing more than 50 culverts and a bridge, completing field treatments on 2,500 acres. And these field treatments involve mechanical thinning and mastication work. So the thinning is pretty self-explanatory. The mastication is a process that uses a machine-mounted grinders to reduce brush and the understory, basically to wood chips and scatter them throughout the forest. Contracting for treating another 3,000 acres was also awarded in FY23, and conducting prescribed burns on more than 1,000 acres. We're also starting to complete more non-commercial fields treatments in the WUI and other places, that's a wild and urban interface again, where timber harvest may not be an option. To date, we spent about $11 million of GNA revenue for mechanical thinning, hand thinning, piling, and prescribed burning. Restoration projects generate multiple benefits. Most importantly, treated forests are healthier. I think we all know that. Wildfire risks are reduced, and the money from GNA timber sales flows back into the communities where the contract work was completed. Project planning and NEPA continues to be a major focus for the program. Again, utilizing IDL streamlined contracting procedures, we are able to move planning work more quickly. The recent influx of both timber sale revenues and federal funds have allowed for expanded work in fuels reduction and road repairs, typically tied to upcoming projects. So the work there on streamlining the process to get this work done on the planning front has really paid off in dividends. The timber generated through GNA's restoration work on federal lands has become an increasingly important component of the state's timber supply. In FY23, GNA added 23% additional volume to the federal harvest, and you can see that reflected there in the purple. So that's pretty significant. And don't be confused, it says IDL down there in the box in the corner. This is the GNA program run through IDL, so that's not endowment. Endowment's a whole another ball of wax. Idaho's forest products industry requires a significant amount of fiber to maintain its operations, about 1 billion board feet annually. Time and time again, I've heard from industry leaders that they depend on stable, predictable, statewide harvest volumes year after year. Stability is crucial for their business models because it allows them to make investments in their operations over time, which in turn ensures Idaho's forest products industry remains thriving and competitive. It's remarkable that approximately 900 billion board feet annually is generated from just 4 million acres of private and industrial timberland and endowment land. So 1/3 of that volume comes from state endowment timberland, so about 327 million board feet of volume. So of that 900 million, that's a pretty big chunk coming off of state lands. In comparison, federal non-GNA timber harvests contribute 165 million board feet to the market, and GNA contributes another 45.5 million board feet. This is from 12.5 million acres of federal land. And there's a takeaway from the graph on this page and the vast differences in acreage. It's that active forest management works. Looking to the future, I believe that GNA can continue to add to Idaho's fiber supply, which is good for our forest products industry and the 30,500 Idahoans employed in green-collar jobs. Idaho's overall economy, of which the forest products sector contributes $2.5 billion annually. It's also good for our forests, the purity of our water, and the abundance of wildlife and recreational opportunities. And it's good for our communities because no family should have to live under the threat of devastating wildfires. So, Madam Chair, that was GNA 101 in a nutshell. We throw a lot at you today, and I would be happy to stand for some questions. And again, we also have our state forester on standby to bail me out on questions I can't answer.
Thank you, Director. Do we have some questions? Senator Lakey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, appreciate the presentation. So as I've been to, particularly North Idaho and toured some of the Forest Service lands up there, the comments we would get, and maybe it's related to the NEPA process, is they say that their hands are tied to a good degree because as they try to do fire mitigation, they're faced with lawsuits to challenge those efforts. How does that relate to our GNA contracts? We have the master contract. Do we face those same challenges in our contracts? And I guess expound a little bit for me there from your perspective.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator Lakey, appreciate the question, and certainly, the projects under Good Neighbor Authority are not litigation-proof. We have one in particular, ongoing litigation on the Panhandle National Forest. It's our Hannah Flats GNA project, and that's being litigated because of a few things related to the definition of WUI and being in grizzly bear habitat. And so that's been stalled out for a while. What we are doing through GNA is demonstrating the outcomes on the ground that anybody on the political spectrum can support, right? We're putting up timber volume. That's good for the industry. It's good for small communities. And money's going back onto the ground to restore National Forest System lands. The work that so many people have been asking for such a long time, working with the Forest Service to restore these acres. So the projects are not litigation proof, but we're demonstrating that we're getting some good things done that most everybody can agree to that are good projects to move forward with. So we've been working through the NEPA bottleneck with our GNA program and utilizing our contracting procedures to try to expedite getting the planning work done on these projects. But at the end of the day, if somebody's going to challenge a timber sale under GNA or any of these projects, they're going to.
Follow up? Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, thank you for that. Can you explain to me a little bit the nuts and bolts of the agreement itself? So we have the master agreement, and then you said we have sub-agreements below that. Did those agreements call out and limit essentially what we do and call it out specifically, or do we have some discretion to go do things under those sub-agreements?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and Madam Chair and Senator Lakey, we do have the overarching master agreement, and then we have a number of national forests now with their sub-agreements under that. And the projects that we lay out are projects that are consistent with their forest plans. But what I will do is probably kick this question to Craig Foss, because he can answer the details and the nuts and bolts of these agreements in greater detail. If that's all right, Madam Chair.
You bet. Thank you, Director. Madam Chair, Senator Lakey, what Dustin conveyed is right on target. We have an overarching statewide master agreement for good neighbor authority. And then under that, we have agreements with the different national forests, and those are referred to as supplemental project agreements. All of the project work we do on a national forest falls underneath that supplemental project agreement. But we've designed this, we've tried to design the program to where we can just keep adding projects under that supplemental project agreement, and then we revise that budget every year depending on revenue generated or money that the forests contribute. The type of work that we do varies across the state. Typically, you're going to see more commercial timber harvest projects on the Panhandle and the Nez Clearwater National Forest. Still seeing that on the Boise and the Payette. But as you move east, the Caribou-Targhee, the Salmon Chalice, those agreements tend to and even some of the BLM agreement tend to be more focused probably on fuels treatment and forest restoration type work. We don't have the robust timber markets in some of those places that we do in the northern and central part of the state. And so we tailor the projects based on the needs identified in the forest plan. And then we use our staff and our contracting processes to get the work done. Glad to clarify anything that I might have missed.
Follow up, Madam Chair. Thank you, Craig and Director. So I think the way I get the feel it works is we have a master agreement, and then we have a specific sub-agreements that have to have a defined project. It's not like an authority to manage within our discretion a certain area, correct?
Yeah, Craig's nodding his head, and that is
that's correct,
Madam Chair and Senator.
And then one more, if I might. Director, so do you have a feeling of how much federal land is out there that could really benefit from this compared to what we actually have the opportunity to work on? Obviously, you're doing good work, and it's beneficial, but how much more out there could benefit from this?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator Lakey, there's a lot of acres that would benefit from this program. what I said earlier, early on, we worked with the Forest Service to designate 6.4 million acres of National Forest System land for treatment because of insect and disease issues and risk and fire risk, of course. And certainly we've had to be strategic in how we ramp up the program and the types of projects and locations of projects that we go after. A lot of the focus has been in the wild and urban interface to protect communities and to restore forest lands adjacent to those communities. 6.4 million acres, that's a lot of ground to cover, right? What we have done that's additive to GNA is start up the shared stewardship program, and that was in 2018, and that's more of an all lands encompassing approach where we're looking at federal, state, and private lands in two different 2 million acre landscapes, trying to go bigger on the landscape and treat hazardous fuels across all ownerships, working with private landowners that desperately want some work done, and using some of that funding and match funding to get those projects done on non-federal lands that are adjacent to the federal lands. We would love to do more on federal lands, and I think our folks are doing what they can with our capacity and our resources, and they're doing a dang good job at it. But certainly scaling this up, there's a lot of risk out there. There's a lot of insect and disease issues out there. I know the chief of the Forest Service is keenly interested and aware of the risk out there. Under the chief's authority, he started the wildfire crisis strategy, where they've now taken a look at multiple fire sheds around the West to try to prioritize resources and getting more work done on those federal lands within those high priority fire sheds. And we have a handful of those in Idaho that overlap a lot of our GNA acres. They overlap our shared stewardship acres, and they're outside those boundaries too. So,
Representative, do you have a question? Representative Horman?
Oh, yes. Thank
Your
you.
light's on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have never heard the word mastication used in association with forestry, but I understand you're chewing up undergrowth. We know we've had years of mismanagement on federal lands that is contributing to the wildfire situation. Do you believe, or do you have evidence that these efforts are contributing to a reduction in those fires?
Madam Chair and Representative Horman, it all depends on where these fires start, right? I think what we're trying to do is make these areas where we're working right now more resilient to fire. In fact, one of the examples I gave as I started the presentation was the Mercy Fire up there at the Albini GNA sale, which is up near Priest River. And again, Representative Boyle and Senator Burtenshaw were with us on a tour. We had a fire in there, the Mercy Fire, and it burned very slowly. And because of the treatment work that was done on federal land through GNA, that fire was very small and didn't have the resource impact that an unmanaged forest that you would have seen with a fire in an unmanaged forest. So it all depends on where these fires are igniting. But I mean, if you look at the way the state manages or industrial timberlands manage, right? We manage for forest health. We manage to optimize volume to grow trees. We're thinning the understory, doing pre-commercial thins to remove a lot of that ladder fuel, and then we're harvesting the mature trees. When we come back, we prep the site, we replant, and we manage, and part of the prepping is managing the slash and making sure we're taking care of those slash piles and making sure fires do not ignite in those slash piles. And so we manage differently given our mission. So it depends on where the fires are, and in a well-managed forest, you're going to have less of a fire impact than if you do have a fire in an unmanaged forest.
Follow up. Thank you. So I'm looking at what the state has invested versus what we've spent in fire suppression over the last many years I've been on JFAC at least. And it seems to me that in the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure category, this appears to be something that's working. So I don't know if you want to comment further, but I'm looking at the numbers on this and looking at ways to reduce our expenses
Absolutely.
on the back end, and it appears may be having some effect.
Absolutely, Madam Chair and Representative Horman. I believe it is. And you saw the numbers from our fire season, about 17 million. And I do brag on our employees a lot. Is that okay? Our firefighters do a tremendous job in jumping on these fires quickly and suppressing them as quickly as possible. And we go full suppression on all of our fires as long as it's safe. On IDL lands, on industrial timberlands, they're more heavily roaded. So we can get vehicles, we can get our fire engines in there, and that plays a huge role in our suppression response and keeping these fires small. And just what I said earlier on how we manage, right? We manage differently, and we suppress fires quickly and aggressively. And so we're very cognizant of that bottom line at the end of the year when it comes to fire suppression expenditures. I want to report to the legislature the lowest number possible on our suppression account year after year. But these projects, treating these acres, is making a difference. I believe it is.
Thank you.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, Director.
All right.
My hope, since the program has been developed, was to get some of these receipts back to the counties where this harvesting is being done. And it was my understanding we were working in that direction as soon as we had saturation, I guess, where the project was funding itself or the Good Neighbor Authority was funding itself. You had just mentioned something that there were a couple of counties where that was happening, but it was in regards to federal law. Maybe I misunderstood you, but are we still heading in that direction where the counties will be able to gain from some of the receipts from the sales?
Absolutely, Madam Chair and Representative Dixon. That's a big priority of ours as we move forward with the next round of conversations on the Farm Bill, and which we are in the midst of those right now. I know Craig with the State Foresters Association has been very involved in those conversations. Counties can be a partner in GNA, but right now they're unable to retain those timber receipts. And so we want to make sure that we're working with our congressional delegation to implement that fix to where the counties can retain those receipts and cover their costs and move those receipts, the remaining receipts, forward to other GNA projects. And Craig, I don't know, you've been in the thick of those conversations. Is there anything you would like to add? If that's all right, Madam Chair.
No, thanks, Director, Madam Chair, Representative Dixon. Appreciate the question. I guess the only thing I would add, you're spot on, Dustin, with everything you've conveyed. The only thing I would add is that when we started GNA, we really were focused largely on the commercial timber harvest projects that we would engage through GNA. And the representative is correct in that those particular projects don't end up generating receipts, the 25% receipts for the counties. What we didn't anticipate and what we are doing a lot of right now, and Dustin indicated in his presentation, over half the money that we've generated has gone toward NEPA and this environmental review that's required for any activity on federal land. And we're doing an awful lot. We're helping the forests with their project review for all different project activities, not just Good Neighbor Authority. So those traditional timber sales that are conducted on the national forests that do generate revenue and that do generate receipts that can be available to the counties through the 25%, we're helping increase the pace and scale of those particular activities, as well as doing the work that Dustin summarized through GNA. So it's both. That's going on, and then there's also legislation to fix the Farm Bill that enables counties to enter directly into good neighbor agreements with the forests so that they can do project work and they can retain receipts. Right now, the money the counties get through those agreements, like Adams and Valley County, is direct appropriation money that the forest gives to those counties, but it has nothing to do with any retention of receipts. Hope that helps clarify.
Just to follow up, if I might. So those receipts, if they're coming in, can only be used for a Good Neighbor Authority project, or can they go into the general fund, meaning for roads and other things that they used to be able to use those receipts for? I guess that's my question, trying to offset that loss that happened a generation ago, essentially.
Craig, you want to take that?
Madam Chair, Representative Dixon, yeah, the money that counties are getting through those GNA agreements are specific for identified project work, and largely in Valley and Adams County, what those counties are doing is fuels treatment on those national forests, but that is not money that's going into their coffers to be used as you just described. So that has not been addressed yet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director.
Okay. Thank you so much, Director.
Right.
It was fantastic to be on that tour and actually get to see how good GNA works to stop fires. And I hope we can expand that, especially for the commercial timber. Our forests are a mess. Not the IDL forest, but the national forests. So we'll keep working on that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your support of the program.
Thank you, Craig, too.